Hi, I'm Deborah Siegel, and I'm a PhD in English and American Literature from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a minor in Feminist Cultural Studies. And what I wanted to share with you today, those of you who are considering or already pursuing alt-ac careers, is 10 things that I learned along the way to becoming a more versatile PhD. So lesson number one, the best career development strategy is the experiment. When I was in graduate school, I was the assistant editor for a journal, American Literary History, and I did a short internship at the University of Wisconsin Press. I didn't know at the time if I'd like editorial work, if that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew early on that I didn't want to pursue necessarily a career in academia and that I needed to diversify. I ended up interviewing once I left at a number of publishing houses when I moved to New York City, but I realized pretty quickly that I still wanted to be on the other side of that desk. I still wanted to be writing rather than editing alone. But sometimes you don't know what turns you on until you're really out there, which connects to lesson number two, which is greenlighting yourself is the key to identifying other work that you want to and are qualified to do. I borrow here from my colleague Brooke Warner at She Writes Press, who talks about greenlighting yourself to write a book. And I think a lot of people have big dreams but are afraid to claim the space. And I think particularly sometimes people are afraid that they don't have the right competencies or the right skill sets. And sometimes that's true, they don't, and they have to go out there and get new skill sets before staking out a claim in a new area. But most times I find when people are coming out of academe, the larger problem is that we're conditioned to stay within a very narrow niche of expertise. And as we say at the Op-Ed Project, which is a social venture where I teach, expanding your window of relevance is what makes you relevant to a broader world. And a lot of times the barriers I find aren't as much external as they are internal. And just as an example, just quickly, I wrote a dissertation about the travels, rhetorical and real, of the slogan, the personal is political, through second and third wave feminist discourse in the US. And I ended up publishing a book on a commercial list that was about the fights and frenzies around feminism in America over the past 40 years. I rewrote every single sentence along the way in becoming a book, but it was the same topic. And it was just a different, wider frame. Publishing my dissertation as a popular book opened a lot of doors for me in journalism, on the speaking circuit. I ended up going on the Today Show. I wrote op-eds. I continue to write op-eds. I did a TEDx talk recently. Things I had dreamed of doing, but had to leave academia myself to greenlight myself for. I didn't want to wait till I had tenure to do these kinds of things. I wanted to do them now. On a different note, but also on the spirit of greenlighting, and also on a note of serendipity, when I left academia, it was the late 1990s. It was the dot-com boom, and I moved to New York City and became fascinated and excited by new technologies for spreading ideas and sharing information. And one night I was sitting at my cousin's house, and his best friend was over talking about the startup that he was starting up. And he saw that I had a background in English literature and I had experience editing. And he asked, would I like to be the content director for this new startup website? Did I ever envision myself as a content director? Did I even know what that was at the time? No, back when I was in graduate school. But when the opportunity came, I said, of course. And I learned a lot along the way. I also started a blog around that time. It was kind of a PhD's guide to life beyond the ivory tower, and I was sharing what I was learning as I went. But I was also learning how to blog and learning new tech tricks, and I was part of an organization called Web Girls, where people were sharing information and learning new skills. And later, I was able to kind of combine my excitement by technology and my interest in feminism when I was at the Barnard Center for Research on Women. I helped them launch the Scholar and Feminist online web journal, which bridged and still bridges academic and non-academic audiences around these issues. which is something I always wanted to do. So takeaway there is green light yourself, say yes. You never know where things lead. Have curiosity, be open, have an appetite for the new. Lesson number 3, the mentors you seek may already be under your nose. I often tell people to look back on what they did before graduate school if they didn't go straight from undergrad and start there. Before graduate school, I worked for 2 years at a national organization called the National Council for Research on Women. And I found mentors there and actually ended up working for them again for 3 years after my PhD. When I applied for an Echoing Green seed grant to start a new initiative I had in mind, which I didn't get, by the way, I was advised by one of the board members and really mentored by her and learned a lot about entrepreneurship. And another board member from that organization became my first client when I ultimately left the organization to consult, which leads me to lesson number 4. If you're going on informational interviews, which I do think are a good idea, don't call them that. It's networking. What can you offer this person sitting across from you? For an example, I went to explore working at the Feminist Press, and I had a meeting with the publisher at the time, Jean Casella, who I knew, again, from the National Council for Research on Women, and I brainstormed with her ways to make the message of the press and the image resonate with younger generations. And she, in turn, shared information with me about what it was like to work there. So it was an exchange, an authentic exchange, and not just an informational interview where I was just receiving. Lesson number 5, the skills you think are the most transferable aren't always the ones necessarily that become of most value or most use when you make the transfer. I took a seminar as I was thinking about leaving academia with Howard Fiegler, who wrote a career handbook, and he was offering this workshop during an MLA conference next door. So a number of us were kind of sneaking out of MLA and going to this conference, and it was very helpful, very transformative in helping me see that editorial work was indeed something I wanted to pursue outside of academia. But what turned out to be most transferable once I left was not necessarily the skills that I thought I had. Instead, it was my ability to get smart fast on new topics that initially seemed overwhelming. And translating specialized knowledge for popular consumption has become or became and continues to be one of my core competencies, to borrow a phrase from the business world. So sometimes there's a bit of surprise. Lesson number 6, which may also be a surprise. People respond positively to your having a PhD. They don't know what it's in, and they often don't care. Of course, that can sometimes be a problem. You never want to pretend you're something you're not. And just a quick story, my first TV appearance when my second book came out, which was a literary anthology of essays by writers who were only children about the experience of being an only child at different stages of life. When I went to talk about the book on a local TV show in New York, the interviewer seemed to think I was a PhD in psychology and some kind of parenting expert. I was neither. I didn't have kids. It was a literary anthology. So, sometimes it's important to make clear what your PhD is in if you're going to use the letters. But I get asked to be on panels now because I have it. I'm a visiting scholar at Northwestern University in gender studies because I have it. And I sense that some of my clients in my coaching practice now are attracted to the fact that I have it. I just actually, last week, changed my URL to DeborahSiegelPhD.com. Deborah Siegel was taken. I would have just gone with that. But it had been Deborah Siegel Writes, which was starting to feel too contained and small. So I just went with who I am, Deborah Siegel PhD, because it was available. And I had a friend, comment back to me, why would, who in the humanities world flaunts their PhD? You're so understated about it yourself, she said to me, and that's what makes you appeal. And I thought, she's got a point, but I stand behind it, and I like wearing those letters now. I'm proud of them, DeborahSiegelPhD.com, which leads me to lesson number 7, be yourself in public. I think the way for former academics or post-academics or alt-academics to say they're smart without saying I'm smart is by showing it in public venues. Clips journalism clips, op-eds, blogs become calling cards and networking tools. It's what they call content marketing in other realms. And the thing you're marketing here is your expertise, your thoughtfulness, your smarts. A website can also help. URLs are replacing business cards. If you happen to be looking for venues, by the way, to start writing in public, and if your topic happens to be on gender, feel free to pitch me. I'm deborahgirlwpen@gmail.com. I run the blog Girl with Pen that's housed at the society pages, and our mission is bringing gender research, bridging gender research and popular reality. Clips lead to more clips, and you have to start somewhere. And speaking of writing work, let's talk about freelancing for a second. Lesson number 8. In reinventing yourself as a freelancer, drop the word freelancer. Freelance work, like adjunct work, is devalued. Stop calling it freelance work. If it's for an organization or a company, it's consulting. If it's project work, it's contract work. Eventually, maybe it's I'm starting my own business. I felt empowered to call myself a consultant after a few years at a staff job, learning the ropes of how organizations work and what people need. I've since been growing a coaching practice, which until I started a company was a form of freelance, but I never called it that, never thought of it that way. Of course, freelance writing is freelance writing and there's no other word for it, but it's very hard to make a living as a freelance writer. And I personally have managed to find ways to let my writing be my passion projects, and I fund myself in other ways. My writing also augments my platform for the professional work I do. Which leads me to lesson number 9, have an elevator pitch. Not just for the sake of others, but for your own sake, for your own sense of feeling grounded and knowing who you are, so that you don't have to experience all the narratives that go on in your head about what you're doing and the decisions you've made over and over again each time. Early on, I would say things like, I did a doctorate in literature and narrative, and now I work for an organization that brings alive research on women and girls by connecting it to action and media. When my books came out, I left that staff job, it was the first time I felt confident calling myself a consultant. I consult for organizations that connect research and media. I became a consultant to a number of the organizations that were under the larger umbrella of the National Council for Research on Women. So that place was really my launching pad. Years later, in terms of elevator pitch, I finally found a way to integrate the way I talk about my own research and writing interests with my paid work, and to explain what I do in the same breath. And it sounds something like this. I'm a writer, a speaker, and thought leadership coach. I'm an expert in gender, politics, and the unfinished business of feminism across generations. I've written 2 books. I'm working on a 3rd. I've given a TEDx talk, published op-eds in the Washington Post, been on the blah, blah, blah. And I help my clients do these things too. I help them find their voice and the forms and forums that make sense for their writing, speaking, and ideas. And together, I help them find their mission, their message, their mojo. I help them shape their content and translate their specialized knowledge and their own stories on the page, on stage, and online. It's a far cry from a doctorate in literature and a dissertation on the travels, rhetorical reel of a slogan, the personal political, blah, blah, but there it is. Lastly, lesson number 10. The only one who can make you feel like a failure for leaving academe, ultimately, is you. Though I never would have believed that at the time when I was deciding to leave, I fully believe it and stand by it today. When I tell my public story now, the fact that I started out in academia feels like my strength. I talk about my training in narrative, my understanding of story, and that's not just spin. I really believe that the things we learn as graduate students stay with us. We come to embody them. I'm a student of narrative, and I continue to be, and the narratives I'm interested in now are my client stories, as well as the book that I'm working on now, which is about the gendering of childhood in the first 5 years of life through the lens of raising boy-girl twins. I have boy-girl twins. And my husband is a graphic designer. We're collaborating on this. It's actually going to be an illustrated memoir. So again, a far cry from where I began, but it somehow all ties together and comes full circle. So I hope this has been helpful and in some way of use, and I wish you well in your travels. Feel free to reach out to me, deborahgirlwpen@gmail.com. Take care.